Welcome to your deep dive. Today we're diving into the fascinating world of persuasion with Robert Cialdini's Influence, the psychology of persuasion.
It's a classic. And for good reason. It really digs into the psychology of why people say yes, why we agree to things we might not otherwise, and how those tendencies are harnessed, for better or for worse in all sorts of areas of life.
I love that you say ethically and otherwise, because reading this book, I get the feeling Cialdini isn't just trying to make us smarter consumers of information, but also, more ethical influencers ourselves.
Right.
He even went undercover with salespeople, fundraisers, all sorts, to really understand their tactics.
He did. That's part of what makes this book so compelling. It's not just theory. It's grounded in real world observation and a little bit of, sneaky observation at that.
Okay, so let's talk turkeys. Cialdini starts off, with this hilarious image of mother turkeys. They're being tricked by a recorded cheep cheep sound. They'll mother anything that makes that noise, even a stuffed polecat.
It's such a funny image, but
Yeah.
it makes a really serious point, which is that we humans, just like those turkeys, we rely on these mental shortcuts.
Right.
The world's too complex, right, to analyze every little decision thoroughly. So we develop these automatic responses, these click-whir moments, like Cialdini calls them,
I love that.
to just kind of simplify our lives.
Right.
But the downside is those shortcuts, they can be manipulated.
Oh, absolutely.
And he gives so many good examples. Remember that jewelry store that accidentally marked up the price of turquoise jewelry?
Oh, yeah.
And then it, flew off the shelves. People just assumed high price. Must be high value.
Right.
Even though they had no idea, really, about turquoise.
We're just on autopilot, making these snap judgments based on these, pre-programmed responses.
Totally. And that leads us perfectly to chapter 2, which is all about reciprocation.
Okay.
This deeply ingrained human need to return favors. It's powerful.
Huge. And Cialdini gives the example, do you remember, of the Hare Krishna Society, where they used to give people, flowers in airports before asking for donations. I have to admit, I kind of fell for it once.
Oh, I think many of us did. Even if we didn't love the group or their message, it's like you felt obligated to give something back for the flower.
Totally. It plays on that, that feeling of indebtedness.
Yes.
We owe them something, even though we didn't ask for anything in the first place.
Exactly. Cialdini highlights this even more in the Regan study, where basically people who were given a small, unsolicited gift, just a can of Coke, ended up buying twice as many raffle tickets.
Wow, twice as many. That is amazing. Just shows how even a small gesture can be surprisingly powerful.
Oh, absolutely. And it makes you wonder, how often are we being kind of subtly swayed by this principle without even realizing it?
Right.
Like a free sample at the grocery store or...
a compliment from a colleague.
Exactly. Or, a well-timed favor.
Oh, yeah. All potentially loaded with, persuasive intent.
Right. It makes you think.
Okay, so we've talked about, these automatic responses, the pull of reciprocity.
Yeah.
But what happens when we make a choice, even a small one? That's where Cialdini's principle of commitment and consistency comes in. And things get a little bit darker in chapter 3.
Yeah.
Right.
This is where he talks about how, once we commit to something, even something small, we are much more likely to agree to larger requests later.
Right.
And he uses kind of a powerful example of American POWs in Korea.
Yeah, it's a tough one, but really important. Can you tell us a bit more about that without, it getting too heavy?
Sure. So during the Korean War, the Chinese, they would try to get American prisoners of war to make these seemingly insignificant concessions, writing down anti-American statements or maybe admitting to small rule violations, things like that.
And being a prisoner of war under duress, a hostile environment, you wouldn't think those statements would mean much.
Exactly. But the Chinese, they understood the power of this, this commitment and consistency principle.
Right.
So even these small acts, especially when they were made public, could really start to shift a soldier's self-perception.
Yeah. They start to see themselves as a collaborator almost.
Yeah.
Making them more susceptible to larger requests, demands down the line.
Exactly. It's like establishing a pattern of behavior that then people feel compelled to maintain for consistency's sake.
Right. To justify to themselves what they've already done.
And this plays out everywhere, not just in, POW camps.
Oh, totally. Think about those foot in the door techniques that salespeople use. They start small, can I just have 5 minutes for a quick demo? Next thing you know, you're signing on the dotted line.
It's all about those baby steps, right? Each small commitment makes the next one that much easier to justify.
It's like we're telling ourselves a story, almost.
Yes.
And we need each action to fit the narrative that we've created.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, it's all about maintaining that narrative, that
Yeah.
sense of self.
Which leads us to another powerful influence tactic. The power of the crowd. Or, as Cialdini calls it, social proof.
Yes.
Chapter 4. He argues that, we are often heavily influenced by what others are doing, especially in uncertain situations.
We are social creatures by nature.
Right.
We look to others for cues on how to behave, especially when we're not sure what the right way to act is.
Oh, absolutely. Think about, you walk past a crowded restaurant.
Oh, yeah.
You're like, oh, it must be good.
Must be good if everyone's here.
Right. Exactly. Or even, just on a street corner, everyone's looking up at a building. You're just like, even though you have no idea what you're supposed to be looking at, you're like, well, I'll look too.
There must be something up there.
But there are darker sides to social proof as well, right?
Yeah, unfortunately. And, one of the cases Cialdini discusses is the tragic case of Catherine Genovese,
Right.
who was murdered in New York City.
Right, right.
And, 38 of her neighbors witnessed this attack, and nobody intervened.
And everyone just assumed someone else had called the police, right?
Exactly. And this is a really horrifying example of how social proof can backfire, right?
Yeah.
So the presence of so many witnesses, rather than encouraging action, actually created this diffusion of responsibility.
Well, right. Everyone thought someone else would take care of it.
Right. Each individual assumed oh, someone else will do it. So no one did.
Wow. It's a chilling reminder that we can't always rely on the wisdom of the crowd.
Right.
Sometimes the crowd is just as clueless as we are.
Exactly. So it's so important to, cultivate critical thinking. Don't just follow the herd, evaluate the situation, trust your instincts.
Right.
And if necessary, be the first one to speak up or take action.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so we've covered automatic responses, the pull of reciprocity, commitment and consistency, the power of social proof. Up next, the art of making people like you. It sounds so manipulative when you put it like that.
Well, it can be. It can be,
Right.
but it doesn't have to be. And this is what's so interesting about Chapter 5, liking. He's exploring those factors that draw us to certain people.
Right.
And then how those factors can be used to influence our decisions.
Right. And he starts with the obvious, right? We tend to like people who are similar to us.
Of course. Okay.
Birds of a feather.
Makes sense, right?
But then he dives into some less intuitive ones, like physical attractiveness.
Ah, yes. The halo effect rears its ugly head.
Right.
We've all heard that attractive people tend to get away with more, but Cialdini, backs it up with research.
Right.
Studies show that we're more likely to trust attractive people, even if we have no logical reason to do so.
It's like our brains are hardwired to associate good looks with other positive qualities.
It's true, and it's completely irrational.
Right. Honesty, intelligence, competence.
Totally, totally. And it's not just limited to attractiveness.
Right.
We also tend to, favor people who compliment us, who cooperate with us, and even those who simply share our names.
Wait, seriously?
Yeah.
People with the same name are more persuasive.
Yeah. It's crazy, right?
That's wild.
He cites a study where people are more likely to donate to a charity if the person asking for the donation had a name that was similar to theirs.
Wow. It's like our subconscious is playing tricks on us, being like, hey, that person's like me, I must like them.
Exactly. And then once that sense of liking is established, even if it's based on something totally superficial,
Right.
we're much more likely to be persuaded by that person.
So how do we defend against this? Should we just, be wary of anyone who's too charming or too complimentary?
I don't think it has to be that extreme.
Right.
It's not about becoming cynical or distrusting everyone who smiles at you.
Right.
It's more about just being aware of the factors at play, right, that influence our perception of likability and making sure that we're making decisions based on, logic and reason,
Okay.
not just a gut feeling.
So trust your gut, but verify.
There you go.
Right. Make sure that, liking isn't clouding your judgment.
Exactly. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of influence, let's talk about authority.
Okay.
Chapter 6. He dives into our kind of deep-seated tendency to obey authority figures.
Right.
Even when it kind of conflicts with our better judgment.
Right. Right. Our good sense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he brings up the Milgram experiments, which,
Oh, boy.
if you're not familiar with these, it was a series of studies back in the 1960s that really revealed just how far people will go
That's right.
to obey authority, even when it involves inflicting harm on others.
And the scary thing is, it doesn't even have to be real authority. Cialdini talks about those bank examiner scams, like people just hand over their life savings to some guy in a suit.
Right. It's just the appearance of authority, right? A
Mm.
uniform, a fancy title, even just like a really confident attitude,
Right.
that can be enough to trigger this automatic response.
It's like our brains are just saying, like, don't ask questions, just do what you're told. So how do we break free of that? Because I don't want to just hand over my wallet to anyone in a uniform.
Well, it's tricky, but I think it's about recognizing the power of authority while also remembering to question it,
Okay.
right? Like, is this authority figure legit? Are their demands actually ethical?
Right.
Don't be afraid to ask for credentials, to get a second opinion, or even just to say no if something feels wrong.
Yeah, question everything.
Exactly. Question
I
everything.
like it. Okay. We've covered a lot. Automatic responses, reciprocity, commitment, social proof, liking, authority.
Yeah.
What's left?
Well, we can't forget about scarcity.
Oh, right.
Chapter 7. This is
Okay.
where he really digs into our desire for things that are rare or unique or in limited supply.
Ooh, yeah. This one really gets me. I'm such a sucker for a limited time offer.
Of course, of course.
Why is scarcity such a powerful motivator?
Because it plays on that fear of missing out, right? Like,
Right.
we're hardwired to put more value on things that are scarce because scarcity often equals value, at least in the natural world.
Right.
A scarce resource is a valuable resource.
Right. It's like our brains are still stuck in survival mode, even when we're just like at target.
Totally. And Cialdini talks about this really interesting study where participants were asked to rate cookies in a jar.
Okay.
And they consistently rated the cookies as more desirable when there were only a few left.
Really? Even though they were the same cookie?
Even though they were the same darn cookies, it was all about that perception of scarcity.
Oh, wow. That's so interesting.
Isn't that wild? And of course, marketers, they're really hip to this. They use limited time offers, exclusive deals, limited quantities. You know the drill.
Right, right. To create a sense of urgency. You don't know what you've got till it's gone.
Exactly, exactly. Okay, so we've gone through all 7 principles, these tools of influence.
Yes.
What's the takeaway for our listeners? What do we do with all this?
Right. What do we do with all this information?
I think the important thing to remember is that this work, Cialdini's work, it isn't about like manipulating people.
Right.
It's about understanding these forces that shape our decisions for better or for worse.
Right.
And by understanding them, we become more aware.
Right. We become more conscious influencers and less influenced ourselves.
Yes, exactly.
This has been like so eye-opening. Like it's amazing how subtle but powerful these principles can be
It's true.
and how often they're working on us without us even realizing it.
I know, right? And I think that's the beauty of this book. It helps us understand not just the what of persuasion, but the why.
Right. The why.
And in that understanding, we get a little bit more agency,
Right.
a little bit more freedom.
To make our own choices.
Exactly.
Well, folks, next time you see a limited time offer, a celebrity endorsement, or even just like a really well-timed compliment,
Be suspicious. No, I'm just kidding.
remember Robert Cialdini?
Remember Cialdini. Think about those principles at play. Ask yourself, am I being influenced right now? Or am I making a conscious choice?
Love it. Well, that's a wrap on our deep dive into influence, the psychology of persuasion. We hope you've enjoyed this exploration of persuasion. And until next time, stay curious.